You need to hear this one. I wasn't planning to share this story, but after everything that unfolded that night, I simply couldn't hold it in any longer. A woman in a crimson gown dripping in jewels, screaming at a housekeeper in the freezing downpour, and a billionaire standing there, completely still, watching the woman he was days away from marrying tear someone apart, someone he hadn't truly recognized yet. "Beg me for food," she said. Nobody standing in that garden had the slightest idea what was about to happen next. By the time that night was over, one man's entire world would come crashing down, and all it would take was a tray of ruined rice to do it. Welcome back, everyone. Before we dive in, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and which country you call home. I genuinely love reading where this community comes from each and every day. Today's story is one of the most emotional and gut-wrenching journeys I've ever shared on this channel. It's about pride, cruelty, and a secret buried so deeply that even the man standing at the very center of it never saw it coming. Stay with me until the very end, because what happens in the final part of this story will stay with you long after you close this video. Let's begin. Nobody could have predicted that a single rainstorm would change 4 lives forever. Her name was Maya Santos, and at 26 years old, she had already lived through 3 lifetimes of hardship packed into one exhausted body. She worked as a housekeeper at the Harrington Estate, a grand, sprawling manor on the outskirts of Augusta, Georgia, owned by one of the most affluent families in the entire state. The Harringtons had built their fortune through lumber and real estate across 3 generations, and their name was embroidered into every charity gala, every hospital wing, every glossy society magazine in the South. Maya had been employed there for almost 2 years. She started as a laundry assistant, gradually moved up to general housekeeping, and eventually became one of the personal attendants assigned to the family's private quarters. It wasn't a career she had dreamed of as a little girl. She had once wanted to become a nurse. But when her mother fell seriously ill back in their small hometown just outside Augusta, and the medical bills began mounting faster than Maya could process them, dreams became a luxury she simply could no longer afford. So she tucked away her nursing textbooks, slipped on the pale yellow uniform with its white apron, and learned to dissolve into the background of other people's lives. That was the reality of working in a household like the Harrington Estate. You learned to become invisible. You scrubbed away messes people refused to acknowledge they had created. You overheard arguments through doors you were never supposed to linger near. You witnessed sons who never returned their father's calls, and daughters who wept silently in bathrooms after conversations with the very people who were supposed to cherish them. You saw everything, and you were expected to see nothing. Lucas Harrington was the sole heir to the family empire, 32 years old, and positioned to inherit the entire dynasty his grandfather had built from a single timber yard nearly 70 years ago. Lucas was cut from a different cloth than most young men in his social circle. He never flaunted his wealth. He drove an old pickup truck when no one was paying attention, wore his father's worn wristwatch instead of splurging on something new, and treated every member of the household staff with more genuine respect than most people extended to their own relatives. Maya admired him for that, not romantically, or at least that's what she told herself, but in the quiet way you respect someone who has no need to prove their superiority over you. 3 months before that stormy evening, Lucas had gotten engaged to a woman named Vivienne Leclair, the daughter of a prominent hotel chain owner from Raleigh. Vivienne was beautiful in the way fashion covers are beautiful, polished, precise, and expensive looking. But Maya noticed things that others overlooked. She noticed how Vivienne's smile vanished the instant Lucas turned away. She noticed how Vivienne spoke to the staff as though they were pieces of furniture that occasionally needed reminding of their purpose. She noticed most of all the cold, calculating look behind Vivienne's eyes whenever they landed on Maya specifically, a chill that felt less like social snobbery and more like something deeply personal. Something Maya couldn't quite put a name to. The night of the engagement dinner was supposed to be intimate and uncomplicated. A small private gathering in the estate's garden pavilion. Strings of warm lights woven between the oak trees. A catering crew of 6. And Maya assigned to serve the head table. The weather forecast had promised a clear, calm evening. Nobody had accounted for the storm that swept in from the coast that night, dark clouds swallowing the stars in under 20 minutes. Maya remembered carrying the final dessert tray across the lawn just as the first drops began to fall. She remembered Vivienne's sharp voice slicing through the chatter, snapping orders at the staff, move faster, cover the tables, fix her hair which the rising wind had begun to loosen from its careful updo. Maya remembered thinking, this is going to be a very long night. She had no idea just how long. As she hurried across the lawn balancing a tray of food that had already been rejected from the kitchen, Pasta the head chef deemed unfit for presentation, destined for the staff break room, her foot snagged on a slick root buried beneath the wet grass. She stumbled, barely catching herself, and the tray tilted sharply, spilling half its contents onto the muddy ground. It was nothing. It was staff food. It was, in every practical sense, already garbage, food that was never going to reach a single guest's plate. But Vivienne had seen it happen from 20 feet away, standing beneath the pavilion canopy in her scarlet gown. And something in her expression shifted, settling into a kind of cold, deliberate fury that had nothing to do with spilled pasta at all. "You careless girl," Vivienne said, her voice cutting clean through the sound of the rain. "Do you have any idea what this dress cost? Do you have any idea what any of this cost?" Maya, soaked and mortified, kneeling in the mud and trying to salvage what she could, opened her mouth to apologize. But Vivienne was nowhere near finished. What Vivienne said next would echo through that garden, through that family, and through Maya's entire life, because certain words, once spoken aloud in front of witnesses, can never be pulled back. Maya never imagined 3 words could shatter something inside her that had already survived so much. "Beg me for food," Vivienne said. The rain was falling harder now, flattening Vivienne's dark hair against her forehead, but she didn't seem to notice or care. Her gaze was locked entirely on Maya, who was still kneeling in the mud, hands trembling, the ruined tray resting beside her. "I'm sorry, Maya began. "Beg," Vivienne repeated, louder this time. Loud enough that the nearby catering staff froze mid-motion. Loud enough that heads turned beneath the pavilion where guests had gathered to escape the rain. "You wasted food that people are starving for somewhere in this world, and you think you can just say sorry and walk away? You are going to kneel right there and beg me for the food you threw on the ground, or you're going to leave this property tonight without a single dollar of your last paycheck." Maya felt something cold settle deep inside her chest, colder than the rain soaking through her uniform. She thought about her mother's medication, still needing to be filled next week. She thought about the small apartment she shared with her younger brother Diego, who was saving every spare cent toward community college. She thought about how one missed paycheck could unravel months of careful budgeting. Pride told her to stand up and leave. Necessity told her something else entirely. Her voice cracked as she looked up through the downpour. "Please," she said quietly. "Please, may I have the food back?" A few feet away, beneath the pavilion, Lucas Harrington stood frozen. He had been deep in conversation with Vivienne's father when the commotion started. And by the time he turned around, he was confronted with a scene that didn't match anything he thought he knew about the woman he was planning to marry. He watched Maya, a woman he had spoken with nearly every morning for 2 years, a woman who had once stayed late without being asked to help his elderly grandmother safely down the stairs during a power outage, a woman he considered one of the most quietly dignified people in his entire household, kneeling in the mud and begging. Something inside Lucas's chest turned to stone. He began walking toward them. That was when Vivienne turned around, expecting perhaps approval, expecting Lucas to brush it off as staff discipline, expecting the moment to pass the way similar moments had passed at other events, in other houses, with other people who were paid too little to push back. Instead, Lucas's face was unreadable in a way Vivienne had never witnessed before. "Vivienne," he said, his voice low and measured. "What did you just say to her?" "I was teaching her a lesson, Lucas. Don't make this into something dramatic," Vivienne said, waving a manicured hand as though shooing away an insect. "She's staff. This is how it works." "This is not how it works in my house," Lucas said. The guests beneath the pavilion had gone completely silent, the kind of silence that carries more weight than any noise. Vivienne's father shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat and glancing between his daughter and his future son-in-law with the practiced composure of a man long accustomed to smoothing over social disasters. Maya, still drenched, still kneeling, tried to gather herself and rise. Shame burning far hotter than any rain could cool. "It's all right, sir," she said quietly to Lucas. "I'll clean this up." "No," Lucas said, and something in his tone made both women go still. "You will not clean anything up right now. Go inside. Get yourself warm. That is an order, Maya, and I mean it with every bit of kindness I have." Maya hesitated, glancing at Vivienne, whose jaw was clenched tight enough to crack. Then she nodded and walked toward the servants' entrance of the manor, her shoulders trembling. Whether from the cold or from humiliation, no one standing in that garden could say for certain. Lucas turned back to Vivienne. "We need to talk." "Privately." "Lucas, it's pouring. We're at our own engagement dinner. Can this honestly not? Now, Vivienne. They walked several yards away toward the stone fountain at the edge of the garden, far enough that the guests couldn't make out the words, but close enough that a few sharp phrases still carried on the wind. Lucas's voice, usually so composed and measured, rose in a way the staff had never heard before. "How long have you been treating my people this way?" he demanded. "Your people." Vivienne shot back. "They're employees, Lucas, not family. I don't understand why you're acting as though I've committed some kind of crime. You made a grown woman kneel in the mud and beg for food she accidentally spilled. Food that was already being thrown out. People like her need boundaries. People like her." Lucas interrupted, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet register. "Finish that sentence, Vivienne. I want to hear you finish it." Vivienne's mouth opened, then shut. For the first time that evening, something resembling uncertainty flickered across her perfectly composed face. But what Lucas didn't know yet, what no one at that garden party knew, was that the woman kneeling in the mud, the housekeeper he had just offended, was carrying a secret so deeply buried that even she rarely permitted herself to think about it. A secret that connected her to this family and to this house in a way that would transform everything Vivienne had done that night into something far more dangerous than simple cruelty. That secret was about to come out. And when it did, nothing about that engagement or that family would ever be the same again. Nobody in that garden was prepared for what an old photograph tucked in an apron pocket was about to reveal. Inside the manor, Maya sat wrapped in a towel in the small staff break room off the kitchen, her wet uniform draped over a chair, her hands still trembling, and not entirely from the cold. The head housekeeper, an older woman named Miriam who had served the Harrington family for nearly 25 years, brought her a steaming mug of tea and settled into the chair across from her. "You doing all right, sweetheart?" Miriam asked. Maya nodded, though the nod convinced no one. "I just want to finish my shift and go home." Miriam studied her for a long moment, the way older women sometimes study younger ones when they see their own past reflected back through decades. "You know," Miriam said slowly, "I've worked in this house a long time. I knew Mr. Harrington's father. I knew his grandfather, too, back when he was still alive and this estate was half its current size." Maya wrapped both hands tighter around the warm mug, unsure where this was leading. "There's something I probably should have told you a long time ago," Miriam continued, casting a glance toward the doorway to confirm they were alone. "Your last name, Santos, that was your father's side. But your mother, she went by Vega before she married, didn't she?" Maya blinked, caught completely off guard. "How do you know that?" Miriam reached into the front pocket of her apron and drew out an old, worn photograph, one she had apparently been keeping far longer than Maya had realized. It showed a young woman standing beside a much younger version of old Mr. Harrington, Lucas's grandfather, decades ago, on what appeared to be a construction yard. "This is your grandmother," Miriam said quietly. "Clara Vega. She worked here too, back in the 1960s, before this family had anything close to the fortune they have now. She was a laundress, same as I started out as. But there was far more to her story than that." Maya stared at the photograph, her breath catching in her throat. The young woman's face. She had seen that same jawline in her own mother's old pictures. The same eyes that looked back at Maya every morning in the mirror. "Old Mr. Harrington," Miriam said carefully, "loved your grandmother. Genuinely, truly loved her. But it was a different era, and different rules governed everything back then. His parents pressured him to marry someone from a wealthy family, someone who could help grow the business the way they envisioned. Clara left before anyone could find out she was expecting his child. She never told him. She raised that child, your mother, entirely on her own and never breathed a word to a single soul about who the father truly was. Except for one old friend she trusted with the truth, right before she passed. That friend was me," Miriam said softly. "I made her a promise that I'd never speak of it unless the right moment arrived. And Maya, I believe tonight might be that moment." Maya sat frozen, the mug trembling slightly in her grip. "Are you telling me that Lucas is my half-uncle by blood, if I'm doing the math right on the generations?" Miriam said gently, "Or somewhere close to it. I'm no expert on family trees, sweetheart. But Harrington blood runs through your veins whether this family knows it or not." Before Maya could fully absorb what she had just heard, the break room door swung open. It was Lucas, rain still dripping from his suit jacket, his expression a mixture of deep concern and lingering anger from the confrontation outside. "Maya, are you okay? I wanted to make sure you—" He stopped mid-sentence when he saw Miriam's face. Saw the old photograph resting on the table between them. Saw the way both women looked as though they had just been discovered in the middle of something enormous. "What's going on?" Lucas asked slowly. Miriam looked at Maya, silently asking permission. Maya, still in shock, gave the faintest nod. "Lucas," Miriam said, rising to her feet, her voice steady despite the weight of what she was carrying. "I think you need to sit down. There's something about your grandfather, and about Maya's family, that I should have told this family a very long time ago." Outside, the storm continued to batter the windows, thunder rolling low across the Georgia sky, as though the whole night was holding its breath for what came next. Meanwhile, back in the garden, Vivienne stood alone by the fountain, watching the lit windows of the manor, completely unaware that the woman she had just humiliated in front of dozens of witnesses might be more connected to the Harrington fortune, and to Lucas himself, than Vivienne could have ever conceived. She had believed she was marrying into old money. She never imagined she was about to lose everything because of the way she treated a housekeeper. Lucas sat in stunned silence as Miriam laid out the full picture, the photograph, the story of Clara Vega, the quiet decades-long secret his own grandfather had taken to his grave. Maya sat beside him, still wrapped in her towel, watching the man she had served coffee to almost every morning for 2 years slowly absorb the realization that they might share the same blood. "This doesn't make sense," Lucas finally said, though his voice lacked any real conviction, like a man arguing against something his gut had already accepted. "My grandfather never mentioned any of this." "Men like your grandfather rarely spoke about their deepest regrets, Lucas," Miriam said gently. "Especially not the ones that cost them the people they truly loved." Lucas looked at Maya, truly looked at her, the way you look at someone when your entire understanding of them has just shifted completely. 2 years of quiet mornings. Small acts of kindness she had never sought recognition for. The dignity she carried even while performing the most thankless work in his household. He thought about how she had never once treated him differently than she treated the gardener or the driver. How she had never tried to use closeness to wealth as leverage the way so many people in his social circle did, constantly and without shame. "Maya," he said quietly, "did you know any of this?" She shook her head, tears finally breaking free now that the shock had worn thin enough to let emotion through. "No. I had no idea. My mother never talked much about her father. She always said it didn't matter, that family was about who raised you, not about blood." "She sounds like she was a remarkable woman," Lucas said gently. "She was," Maya whispered. A long silence followed, filled only by the sound of rain against the windows and the distant murmur of the party still carrying on outside, completely oblivious to the earthquake happening inside the house. "I need to go speak with Vivienne," Lucas finally said, standing up. His voice had changed, steadier now, resolved, carrying the weight of a decision already made somewhere deep inside him during that quiet pause. "Lucas, wait," Maya said quickly, rising as well despite Miriam's gentle protest that she should stay warm and dry. "Please don't do anything on my account. This isn't about punishing Vivienne for what she did to me. If she's truly the right partner for your life, then whatever this is between our families, it doesn't have to change that." Lucas turned to look at her, something soft and complicated moving across his face. "Maya, this was never just about tonight's dinner or the photograph or any of this. This is about who Vivienne really is beneath all the polish. You just gave me the clearest view of that I've had in 3 months of being engaged to her. The family history is a separate matter entirely. But what I witnessed in that garden tonight, that was real. That was who she is when she believes nobody important is watching." He walked back out into the rain without reaching for an umbrella, his dress shirt soaking through in seconds, and crossed the lawn toward Vivienne, who was still standing near the fountain with her arms folded, visibly irritated by how long this household drama had pulled him away from their own celebration. "Finally," Vivienne said as he approached, "can we please go back inside and rescue what's left of this evening?" "There's nothing left to rescue, Vivienne," Lucas said. Her arms slowly uncrossed. "What are you talking about?" "I watched you force a woman to kneel in the mud and beg for scraps tonight," Lucas said, his voice carrying clearly now despite the rain, loud enough that a handful of nearby guests who had drifted out from beneath the pavilion turned toward them. "In front of my family. In front of your family. In front of people we were supposed to be building a future with. And the worst part isn't even what you did, it's that you never hesitated. Not for a single second. That tells me everything about who you'll become once there's a wedding ring on your finger and no reason left to perform decency for an audience. Lucas, you're being completely ridiculous. She's just, don't, Lucas said sharply, cutting her off. Don't finish that sentence again. You already attempted it once tonight and I stopped you then, too. Vivienne's face went pale, then flushed scarlet with anger and humiliation as she realized just how many guests had gathered close enough to hear every word. Phones subtly angled. Whispers already rippling through the crowd like the rain spreading across the lawn. You're calling off the engagement over a housekeeper. Vivienne's voice cracked with disbelief. I'm calling it off, Lucas said calmly, because you showed me tonight exactly who you are, and I refuse to spend the rest of my life pretending I didn't see it. He turned and walked back toward the house, back toward Maya, back toward Miriam, back toward the strange, overwhelming, quietly beautiful truth that had unraveled itself in the middle of a thunderstorm, leaving Vivienne standing alone by the fountain in her ruined crimson gown, the rain washing away her makeup along with 3 months of carefully constructed plans. Sometimes the storm that destroys your evening is the very same storm that rescues your life. The weeks that followed were a blur for Maya. The engagement scandal moved swiftly through Augusta's social circles, not through any deliberate effort by Lucas, but because dozens of witnesses had been present for the confrontation in the garden, and stories like that don't stay contained for long, especially among families who thrive on gossip dressed up as genuine concern. But something else happened too, something Maya never could have anticipated. Lucas quietly arranged for a private DNA test, wanting to approach the truth methodically rather than appending both their lives based on an old photograph and a housekeeper's decades-old promise. 3 weeks later, the results confirmed what Miriam had believed in her heart all along. Maya's mother had indeed been the daughter of Lucas's grandfather, making Maya his first cousin once removed, family by blood, whether the Harrington name had ever acknowledged it or not. Lucas didn't handle the revelation the way many wealthy families might have, burying it, paying for silence, safeguarding an image built across 3 generations. Instead, he sat his own father down and told him everything, plainly and completely. There were difficult conversations. There was shock, and some initial resistance from older relatives who worried about inheritance complications and public perception. But Lucas stood firm, insisting that his grandfather's mistake, choosing money over love, choosing silence over honesty, was not a mistake this generation of the family was obligated to repeat. Maya was formally welcomed into the Harrington family, not with lavish parties or press announcements, but with something far more meaningful, a quiet Sunday dinner where Lucas's father personally apologized for the decades of silence his own father had carried to his grave, and where Maya's mother, frail but overwhelmed with joy, finally learned the truth about the father she had never had the chance to meet. Maya didn't ask for money. She didn't ask for a seat at the table of the family's business empire. What she asked for, when Lucas gently offered to support whatever dream she had set aside, was beautifully simple: help paying for nursing school. The aspiration she had buried years earlier when her mother first became ill. Lucas didn't just help with the tuition. He made sure she never had to work another double shift while studying, establishing a modest trust that allowed her to focus fully on her education for the very first time in her adult life. As for Vivienne, the fallout cost her far more than just the engagement. Video footage of the garden confrontation, quietly captured by one of the catering staff who had witnessed the entire scene, eventually surfaced online, and the story spread well beyond Augusta's social circles. Her family's hotel business faced serious public backlash, with former employees speaking out about similar treatment they had silently endured over the years, now that they saw others finally being heard. Vivienne eventually left the state entirely, starting over somewhere quieter, somewhere her name no longer carried the burden of that stormy night. 2 years later, Maya graduated from nursing school with honors. She now works at a children's hospital in Augusta, a position she chose specifically because it reminded her most of the compassion she had always wished more people had shown her mother during the hardest seasons of their lives. Lucas attended her graduation, seated proudly in the front row alongside Miriam, who had finally, after decades of carrying a difficult secret, gotten to witness the truth bring healing rather than harm. Maya and Lucas remain close to this day. Not merely as distant relatives reconnected by circumstance, but as genuine family, the kind that shows up for birthdays and hospital visits and quiet Sunday dinners, the kind neither of them had fully realized they were missing until a rainy night forced everything into the open. Looking back, Maya often says that the worst moment of her life, kneeling in the mud, begging for food she hadn't even spilled on purpose, became the doorway into the finest chapter of her life. Not because humiliation is ever something to be thankful for, but because sometimes our lowest moments crack open doors we never knew existed, uncovering truths that had been waiting patiently for the right storm to finally bring them to the surface. The lesson of this story is simple, but it's one worth carrying with you. How you treat people who can do absolutely nothing for you reveals more about your true character than how you treat those who can do everything for you. Kindness costs you nothing, but cruelty can cost you everything you've ever worked to build. And sometimes the person kneeling before you, soaked and stripped of dignity, is carrying a story, a strength, a history, and a worth far greater than anything you could ever imagine. If this story moved you tonight, I'd love for you to hit that like button. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story like this one. And if you know someone who needs a reminder that kindness always matters, no matter who is watching, please pass this story along to them. Thank you so much for staying until the very end. I'll see you in the next one.